Hey, what's up guys, it's Renzid. I'm going to be making a video this time for Bladestorm PvP, and I'm going to be going over different build options, and specifically for Astrals and Glyphs for PvP. So a lot of people, when it comes to Astral Blessings and Glyphs, they usually just look at a video or an infographic. Usually they're from China, or if they're from other players, and they just copy it and they just stick with it. But I think it's very important to know how all these Astral Blessings work, and these Glyphs specifically, because they are flexible and there's no, one size fits all. And you do really want to try to be flexible with your Glyphs and Astral Blessings, because they're, different situations call for different Glyphs. It depends on enemy team comps and things like that. Your own team comp, so it depends on the playstyle that you want to try to adapt for that match, if we're talking about 3v3 specifically, or 1v1. So let's go through some of the Astral Blessings and what my recommendations are. So in PvP for Astral Blessings for Bladestorm, there's not that many variations. So for the first slot, I would go with Almighty, just because it boosts your Divine Retribution skills damage by 140%. Now, your Divine Retribution skills are your left clicks and right clicks. Like I said in a previous video, the main abilities Divine Retribution that we use in PvP are the right click left click combo, and so it boosts those that damage by 140%. The reason why this is important though is because it shifts a little bit of your damage to your right clicks and left clicks. Without this ability, pretty much the entirety of your damage comes from Illusory Blade and also your Silent Snow, or Snow Silence rather. And so if with this Astral Blessing, you actually do a decent amount of damage with your right clicks and left clicks. So this is a very, very helpful Astral Blessing in PvP, and that would be my recommendation. The other Astral Blessing, it increases the damage of Star Shower and also the damage from your dot. This Astral Blessing, I have seen other players in China like Genexi. I have seen him use this ability, and there are some scenarios, especially if you know that you're going to be able to land a lot of Star Showers in the future, that I think that this would be helpful for. But especially for newer players and right now, I would recommend just sticking with Almighty for now. So for the second slot, it's pretty easy. I would always take Icy Cold. The other ability is pretty much for PvE only, and it affects like your right click and your double right click. But since we never use the double right click at all in PvP, it's an easy choice. So what this Astral Blessing does is it allows your right click left click combo, specifically the left click, which is the ranged attack. This skill will now apply stacks of your dot, and so you'll see that if I use it again, I'll have 3 stacks now, and it only applies the dot if you have this second Astral Blessing. This is very useful, honestly. Like I said, dot you can just think of as free damage, and so it really does rack up in a long match, and so I wouldn't discount it, and it's very, very useful in PvP. So for the third slot, for this one, for me, it's an absolute no-brainer. You just want to use Dire Straits. It's, it makes Bladestorm in PvP what it is. Illumination is pretty much a PvE skill. You can use it in PvP. I wouldn't recommend it. Demon Blade, again, also just a generic PvE skill for a different build. But yeah, Dire Straits, this is a PvP skill that you want to use. Not much to say about it, honestly. Now the fourth slot rather, I use Snow Swords. The reason why this skill is really nice is that the base skill, it decreases the time that it takes for you to passively get Sword Intense. So like I said, Sword Intent, very, very useful resource for us, because it allows us to spam our right clicks, left clicks, but you'll see that there's a passive generation on that, and so Snow Swords helps you with that passive regeneration. The other effect of Snow Swords, however, is that whenever you use Silent Snow without Dust, it immediately gives you back 5 Sword Intent. And so also another thing, like it says in the tooltip, it also gives you a bonus 15% of physical attack. So in total, it gives you 25% physical attack when you use the buff of Silent Snow. So that's something to keep in mind too. It just beefs up Silent Snow that much more. But it's also, like I said, really useful when you're out of Sword Intent. You can use the very first part of Silent Snow and it immediately gives you back 5. So this is very, very useful in PvP if you are low on resources. It's a good way to get it back. So the reason why I wouldn't use the other ability, Primordial Substance, is because it's just a PvE ability, honestly. It works in combination with Illumination, and if you're not using Illumination, there's pretty much no reason to use Primordial Substance, and so I would just stick with Snow Swords. Also, if you're using Snow Swords, your passive physical limit will give you bonus physical attack. It'll give you 16% physical strength, actually, not a physical attack. It'll give you 16% bonus physical strength based on your haste rather than just 8%. But it's, honestly, this is something that's very, very minor. You don't have to keep in mind at all. The main reason why you use it is definitely because of the Sword Intent. 2 different reasons, like I said before. Now, the last slot for your Astral Blessing, this is the slot that is the most flexible in my opinion when it comes to PvP. Most of the players that I see in use Intervention, and Intervention is what it does is that when you use your CC break, like I said, it gives you 6 seconds of super armor, but what happens is that when you use that Astral Blessing, you also receive 50% damage reduction. So this damage reduction, well, if you're not 100% certain with damage reduction in this game, damage reduction applies multiplicatively if you're having 2 different effects and not additively. But it is something that is very useful because without this Astral Blessing, Blade Storms do not have a damage reduction ability. They don't have a damage reduction buff without this. And a lot of different classes have that. And it's something, especially in this kind of burst meta that we have right now, 50% damage reduction can be very, very useful when you're countering enemy bursts. But it's not something that's mandatory just because we have so many different iframes in our kit, but it's something that is definitely very helpful. And especially for newer players, what's nice about this is that you don't have to be very strict with your timing. 6 seconds is a long time, and so if you're not 100% sure about what you're doing, this 6 seconds, you just pop it and you can sort of forget about it almost. Now, the other option that I would consider for PvP is Cleansing Wind. This skill, most people think of it as a PvE skill, but this skill has a lot of uses, specifically in small scale 1v1s and 3v3s. Cleansing Wind, what it does is that it's a 2-part ability, and the very first part is a 3-second iframe, and within this 3 seconds you can pop the ability again, and what it does is that it gives you a melee ranged offensive skill. And what it does is that it's sort of like, it works like an execute. Basically, if your target is below 50% HP and you use the ability, it will pop all of the stacks and apply all the ticks. Basically, it explodes the ticks of your dot. It applies all of the dot ticks immediately, and it gets rid of your dot. So it's a very, very useful ability. It can be used offensively, but the main reason why you take this skill is because of the 3-second iframe. Now, the 3-second iframe, again, like I said, you'd have to give up the 6 seconds of 50% damage reduction that you would get from Intervention. And so you would use this mainly in 1v1 and 3v3 if you're trying to avoid something specifically. For example, you can use it to counter Reaper's Life and Death Blow. You can use it against summoners if they're trying to pop Cleansing Light on you and trying to pop their Breaker Seals. If you know what your opponent is doing specifically, you can go ahead and counter it with this skill. And the reason why this skill is really nice is that a lot of people will not expect this. Most people, again, they see Intervention and they only think of Intervention as the usable skill, but this can catch a lot of people off guard with it. And so it's very, very useful. But you do have to realize that the melee part of this skill, it's the Sunken Moon. It's not easy to use, and so again, it's the offensive part of this skill really comes relevant when the enemy's under 50%, but you can use it that way as well. So again, I would recommend newer players to stick with Intervention just because it's so much easier to use. but when you get to that higher skill level and you're more familiar with the game in general, I would consider using Cleansing Wind in a lot of situations, and specifically 1v1. I think that in 1v1, most of the time, I think Cleansing Wind is better than Intervention, honestly, but it just takes a lot of experience to know the matchups and to know what you need to be careful of, honestly, from the enemies. So again, we'll just change it to Intervention for now. And then now we'll go on to Glyphs. So for Glyphs specifically, this is where a lot of people can get lost and they can get trapped into thinking that there's only 4 usable Glyphs, when in reality there's a good amount of variation with Glyphs and there's a wide variety. I think the only 2 Glyphs that I would say are mandatory, are the ones at least I think that I like, are Occult Matrix and Bright River. So Occult Matrix, this is the ability that allows you to create 2 healing circles or 2 blade pentagrams with Boundless Will. The translation for it, I know, it used to be, so it even says right now, it says Taihua formation. But basically, if I have a target marked with Boundless Will and I use Blade Pentagram, you'll see that it places 1 below me and 1 below the other target. And the same goes for Field of Recovery. Puts down 1 below me and 1 below the target if you are using Occult Matrix. And so this skill is very, very versatile. You can use it offensively, you can use it defensively. And so I think this is absolutely, I think it's the #1 glyph for Blade Storms in PvP. The next ability that glyph that I talked about was Bright River. So Bright River just reduces the cooldown of Blade Pentagram by 15 seconds and also doubles the regeneration of Blade Pentagram. So Blade Pentagram, like I said, it gives you back Sword Intent, and so it just makes it so that when you're using Blade Pentagram and you're spamming your right click, left click, you almost never run out. And that 10-second buff that you saw there is what is the buff that you get from Blade Pentagram, and that buff, it just keeps you going, honestly. And so I really prefer the shorter cooldown on Blade Pentagram. You can see that when I'm in PvP, it's around like a 30-second cooldown with this skill, and so you can get a lot of usage out of it. You can honestly, with the right usage, you can get 1, 2, or maybe even 3 uses off in a really long fight or more. And so I just like the versatility of Blade Pentagram, because I just think that, it's, one, again, a very, very versatile skill. So I think that these 2 are the most important 2. Aside from those 2, honestly, though, there are pretty much a ton of usable options. And the 2 that I see most often people use when they copy Chinese builds is, one is Return to Original Battle Formation. I'll just call it Return for now. And the other one is Focusing the Mind. So I'll talk about the Return to Original Battle Formation first, and I'll talk about why people in China like to use this ability. So this skill, it just makes it so that it doubles the healing that you get from Field of Recovery. And this skill is nice, especially if you use it with Occult Matrix and you place down 2 circles. Again, if you stand in between these 2 circles, you get double the healing, and you'll get double on top of that if you're using Return to the Returning Glyph. So this skill is obviously very nice because if you are next to the target that you marked and you use this skill, you can get a lot of healing back. But I also wouldn't too heavily rely on this, just because the healing is, although it adds up, if you have a healer right, it's nothing like having a healer, right? It's still absolutely it's just it's a minor heal, but it can help. And in some matchups, that healing, sometimes it's relevant, sometimes it's not very relevant. And so I don't want other Blade Storms to feel like they're trapped into using this, because there are other options. But it's nevertheless a very nice one, and people in China like it because they have larger health pools and they heal more as well, as a result of that. And especially in fights that get drawn out, having this heal, especially if you can pop it twice, it can be game changing. So, but on NA, I think it's great, but not crucial, I would say. The other Chinese glyph that you'll see a lot of players take is Focusing the Mind. Like I said, Focusing the Mind, it just makes it so that you have 10% maximum health additional but you no longer crit. And so it's a double-sided blade, but it can be helpful because sometimes you just need that extra HP. And, you know, just like in PvP, sometimes people take the HP buff over the damage buff. This could be those scenarios where, you know, if you are getting focused too much and you feel like you need this as a defensive option, this can absolutely help. But a lot of people get scared of this because they see that you can no longer crit. And one of the things that I want to clear up in this video is that you don't have to be afraid of this side effect that much, because there are two things to keep in mind. The main damaging skills for Bladestorm are 1, Illusory Blade, and 2, Snow Silence. Now you'll notice both of these skills have long animations, and the damage from these skills are actually, it's dealt in 5 different hits. And so it's a multi-hit ability. So in order for you, for example, when you crit, in order to get an overall damage increase from that crit, you would have to crit on every single hit of those 5 hits in order to get a huge amount of bonus damage. Normally when you crit, maybe you'll get 1 hit to crit, maybe 2 out of the 5 to crit. And so crits don't help you that much. Another thing to know about crits in PvP is that the critical hit, when you do land a crit, is only 36% extra damage. And so it's not a significant boost like in other games where they have, you know, 150% damage modifier, maybe even 200%, something like that. You're not dealing crazy amounts of damage when you are critting, even though it may seem like it when you look at damage numbers or something like that. So just keep in mind that crits aren't that good, but they're still obviously nice at certain points, you know, especially if you just need that extra bit of extra damage. A crit, you know, could help change the game. But but also, you know, extra HP also is nice, but it's not very nice, because on China, when they have much larger HP pools of like 20k, 25k HP, the bonus 10% HP that you get is a lot more significant than right now, where it's like maybe you get 1k extra health, right? Maybe not even the 1k. So you shouldn't be afraid to use this glyph, but you also shouldn't be afraid to not use the glyph also. So that's why I wanted to cover these two. Again, both of them not must-haves, and so sometimes you can consider changing it up. So now I'll cover some of the other potential glyphs that you can use. The main one that you would also want to look into is Compacted Snow. So Compacted Snow, it makes it so that your Cloud Shredder now applies a 22% healing debuff for 10 seconds on the enemy. Now, Cloud Shredder is your RMB skill, but it's the very first RMB skill, and you'll see that it's this melee range skill, and you have to land the skill, and you have to deal damage with it in order for you to get the healing debuff. And so if you're standing at range and you're trying to RMB LMB people in order to reduce the cooldown of Illusory Blade, you're not going to benefit from the healing reduction. You do have to be up close and personal in order to get that healing debuff. So this can be very useful in, you know, of course, healer matchups when both teams have healers, or if the enemy team has a healer and you don't. This is absolutely important. But one thing that it also can be used for is other, you know, when you're fighting against other DPSs, especially classes like Bards, and I believe also Reapers too, when they use Return to Phantom, I believe you can reduce that healing. And also, you know, other Bladestorms as well, right? If they're using the healing field, you can reduce that healing with Compacted Snow. So it absolutely has its uses in healer matchups and also against other DPS classes. So it's something to consider that you can use. Now, so that's one common one that you'll see a lot of Bladestorms use. But you'll also see two that I would recommend that you don't see people running very often. And one is called Path of Chivalry. A lot of people use this in PvE because it grants you free crit hit rate, basically. But you can also use this in PvP, especially if you know that you're going to be playing more as the aggressor in the matchup. And if you have a more aggressive playstyle, this can be really beneficial. So the way that this works is that when you use it and you enter combat, you gain 3 stacks of the Path of Chivalry buff. Each stack increases your critical hit rate by 1%, and so in total you get 3% critical hit rate. However, every time you use your shift dodge, you actually lose 1 stack. And it actually takes a good amount of time before you can get that extra stack back. I believe it's 15 seconds. And so it punishes you for using your shift dodge, but it also rewards you with that extra bonus critical hit rate. And even though I said previously that critical hits in this game aren't super important, again, they can be nice to have just when you need that extra bit of damage, especially if the enemy is low, right? And you think, oh man, if only I had that extra crit, or if I landed a crit there, you know, could have changed the course of a fight. So it's something that I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't shy away from. It's very nice, especially also if you're playing in BGs, right? This could be a very nice ability to use when you know that you're just going to be playing more aggressively in general. Other than that, not much to say about this skill. It's a very simple skill, and feel free to run it when you're trying to play aggressively. The other skill that I would want other people to look at and consider is Flood of Clouds. Not Flood of Clouds, it's actually Cloud Break Wave. So the way that this skill works is that anytime you run out of sword intent, actually I don't even have it on right now, but anytime you run out of sword intent, well, not anytime, but when you do run out of sword intent, it gives you back 2 sword intent for free. And this can happen once every 30 seconds. It has a 30-second cooldown. So you'll see here, I'm using my RMB LMB combo. I'm running out. And you'll see there that it gives me back sword intent. I believe it's actually one or less sword intent is when it gives you that buff. And you'll see here the cooldown of the glyph itself. This is very useful, especially in long, drawn-out fights. Especially, for example, if we have a 3v3 matchup, both teams have healers, right? And you know that you are going to be using a lot of your resources. You're going to be using RMB, LMB a lot. You're going to use up both stacks of Silent Snow, right? And so you'll also be using Pentagram, right? So if, let's say, you have none of these skills up, having this glyph overall can get you, you know, additional illusory blades, right? And especially one of the things that I see people in 3v3 struggle with is managing their sword intent. And so this is a nice little way to help you with that. And it can, you know, over the course of a very long fight, it can give you that extra illusory blade, like I said. And so it's a very nifty tool, and it's important to actually use, you know, when you think that it's appropriate. Again, there's benefits and, you know, obviously disadvantages of every glyph, and so it's important to have the experience to know, depending on the matchup, depending on, you know, the playstyle that you're going for, which glyphs to use. And so you can use any combination of these 2 glyphs, in my opinion, and any of the 2 other glyphs that I mentioned. It's just personal preference, honestly. Again, I just feel that you shouldn't feel trapped. For myself, in 3v3s and 1v1s, I change my glyphs up almost all the time. And so just depending on the scenario, which, you know, 'cause sometimes the heal is not as beneficial. Sometimes healing reduction is not as beneficial. Sometimes you need crit, and sometimes you don't need HP. You know, and so there's situations like that where you can consider taking different glyphs. And it's important to know all the different options that you have so that you can make the best decision when you're choosing before a match. So I hope this little video helps you guys out. I know it's sort of a longer video as well, just because you know, there's a lot to explain when it comes to these glyphs, and that's why I was saying with this video series, you know, each individual video can have a lot of content to go through. But yeah, just another little video that I hope helps out newer Bladestorm PvP players. Let me know in the comments if there's something that you guys wish that there was more explanation for, or if there's something I wasn't totally clear with, or if you have any questions about anything else. I'll go ahead and I'll try to read those all. But yeah, thank you guys for watching.